Hello and welcome. This is rooflemonger, my friends. We're talking Virtua Fighter again. We've been doing that a lot in the last little bit, and specifically we're talking about Virtua Fighter 6, the upcoming game. There was a very large and informative interview with the developers of Virtua Fighter 6 with Famitsu Magazine. This is with Masayoshi Yokoyama, who is the head of RGG Studios, and Richiro Amada, who is the head of the VF project. Now, this interview is actually quite large and expansive and says a lot of things that they probably should have said when the game got announced, to be honest with you. And we're going to go over all of it. Now, the interview is only in Japanese. I will provide a link for you in the video description if you want to check it out for yourself. But I've just took together a bunch of the more choice aspects of the interview here. As it pertains to Virtua Fighter 6 and the franchise in general and stuff like gameplay, we got a little bit of some information on that now. Once again, I'll try to read the important bits here. I'm not going to cover everything in the interview. Check it out for yourself if you can translate it. But I want to start with just the gameplay bits here first. A little bit out of order, but I feel it's important to start here. So Famitsu, in asking the head of RGG Studios and the leader of the VF project, basically, what can we expect gameplay-wise or just anything mechanics-wise from Virtua Fighter 6? One of the biggest deals is that controls, in general, must be kept simple. But that doesn't mean that the 3-button layout will necessarily stay as it is. But of course, they're taking previous fans into account, right? Basically, a lot of things are subject to being changed up. Editor's note, if you're unaware, Virtua Fighter is just 3 buttons, punch, kick, block. That's it, that's all. So they go on to say here, they're very aware that this is going to be a home release primarily. This will not have an arcade release, at least right away, by the way. So that's kind of a big deal. It's a home release, console, PC primarily. And they know that a lot of people playing at home primarily play on controllers, not arcade sticks, not specialty controllers like level-less controllers, your stock PS5 or Xbox pad. That is what most people play on, and the game will be designed with that in mind. Another editor note from me here, VF5 actually plays great on pad, so I don't know exactly what they're going to change up. I don't think it'd be too much, but it is actually legitimately a fantastic pad game, so I wouldn't be too worried. Now that said, next gameplay, ring outs. They talked about ring outs, so ring outs will stay. Ring outs are very core to the DNA of what makes VF. I know some people get salty about ring outs, like it's very telling, like saying Soul Calibur, ring outs got worse every edition of the game, like more protection, harder to ring people out. But ring outs will stay in the game, so don't worry about that. But not every stage will have ring outs. Some stages will be ring out only, also by certain conditions. This could be something that the trailer is hinting at, with Akira, just shouldering people through walls and all that. That could be a more dramatic form of ring out, given the stage that you're on. Doesn't necessarily have to be that it's just a ledge that drops out into water or you fall to the ground. It can be a lot more visually dynamic like that. Although, that's just speculation for now. On the note of the trailer as well, it is specifically mentioned this trailer is not set in Japan. They don't say where in the world, but it is very much not set in Japan, so food for thought. Other notes about the game itself here, the new Virtua Fighter intends to clarify parts of the story and lore that were not easily clear before. That's kind of what they're saying is, VF's lore, what little there is not easily accessible, it's not easily knowable. Like, you need someone like me to tell you all about the Satan Shark over and over to let you know what even exists, right? So that's going to be much more clear inside of the game itself. And it's mentioned in other parts of the interview as well, but they didn't say it outright, but they're like pretty much assuring that there will be a full-on proper story mode as well. But going on from that here, they talk about some secrets in the trailer. Obviously, the trailer features Akira and someone who looks like Sarah. So going back to that initial little teaser, right? We have Akira obviously with the new look, and we have someone who looks like Sarah. We have someone who fights like Sarah, but this is not Sarah. We do know that this is Stella, who has the somewhat ominous title of the Bridge Between Worlds. And we can only really speculate what that means, right? A bare minimum Bridge Between Worlds, I would say, is a bridge between, the future and the past. She is the lead into modern VF from classic VF, maybe. But as for plot, is she a clone? Is she Sarah brainwashed? Is this Doral taking Sarah's form? Who actually knows? But yeah, they are very clear in the interview that Stella is her own thing. It is not Sarah. Specifically on Stella, they can't go into details just yet, but they say it's a game that will be enjoyed by the new and old, and as you play, it'll start making more sense, at least on the Stella front. Now, on characters, so the game will be a mix of new and old, so like obviously Akira's back, Stella's quote-unquote new, we'll see, and of course there'll be all new characters. You would expect all new characters, right? And you would expect some of the classics to return, like Wolf and Jeffrey. I'm not going to say they're auto locks, but they're probably in, although maybe not everyone will return, as we've talked about in the past, and they kind of make a point of that. They say specifically, when talking about a mix of old and new characters, they say, what will happen to the fates of people like Lao and Shun? So, Lao and Shun Di, one is old and dying, and the other one is extra old. So, someone like Lao, they might actually just have him kick the bucket. Like, his whole plot line is, as he got older, he got sicker and sicker, right? And he's looking to pass on his advanced martial arts techniques to his daughter, who is not necessarily as interested, but Lei Fei is very interested, but he doesn't really want to pass it on to Lei Fei, right? So maybe he passes on and one of those two inherits a good chunk of his moveset. Maybe for someone like Shun Di, maybe they give him a bit more of a graceful out, right? Like, you'll have a new student knowing how fighting games work, right? A younger, sexier, drunken boxer, right, than old man Shun. That's usually how the redesigns go, right? But the fact that they brought it up at all, right? Like, the old timers that are kind of sick and dying, maybe they're on their way out. Other gameplay details like DLC. We live in the age of DLC. DLC is a reality. It's gonna happen, right? But they talk about DLC. None of this is set just right. They want this to be a new type of game and not just, the standard model. And their approach to a season pass or DLC will be different from what is the standard. And on that note here, stuff like release date as well. They're in the trenches. Many parts of the games are not fully final yet, but they would like to release it sooner rather than later. They are very proud, RGG Studios, and they mentioned this multiple points in the interview, that, hey, we do very high quality work way faster than everybody else. Like, that's one of the biggest things RGG does as a studio. So they're not half-assing anything, but they want it out quicker than maybe you'd think. Now, for other parts of the interview, basically one is, what took so long on the VF front, right? And there's stuff you've heard before, like it needs to be the right time with the right people. It's like this stuff that's been mentioned before. But right now, Sega is on fire. Sega is kind of in a new golden age. Sega's properties are doing well. Like, hey, the Sonic movies, who'd have ever thought that those would actually take off the way they did, right? Sonic as a franchise is now doing well again. Like, for decades, Sonic was in a very rough patch. Like, a lot of Sega properties are doing very well. That's why they're also bringing back things like Golden Axe, things like Jet Set Radio, and this is basically a big part of that, of the resurgence of modern Sega. Now that things are doing very well, they do not want old properties to languish. Now, specifically, it was brought up as well, what about Virtua Fighter versus the big boys, like Street Fighter, like Tekken? And they explain in the interview that, Virtua Fighter is just a lot more plain than those games, not necessarily in a bad way, but there's no things like fireballs or lasers or like super dramatic, supernatural abilities. They're just martial artists punching and kicking each other. So they use specifically an example from RGG, like Kiryu, right? If Kiryu would shoot a fireball, then nothing in Yakuza would be just realistic anymore, and much the same in Virtua Fighter. So no one's going to be shooting lasers or fireballs or anything like that. Akira's Tetsuzanko, the big shoulder, that can portray realism while still being very dramatic, right? It's still very showy, it's still very eye-catching, so VF doesn't need a fireball necessarily to just be as dramatic looking as a Street Fighter. It's part of the reason why they say RGG Studios is such a great fit, because RGG Studio has very strong dramatic tendencies. Like with the Yakuza games, they can portray things that are grounded and real while still being crazy and fun to watch. And specifically in tooting their own horn here, they say RGG has strengths that rival the other fighting game companies and have strengths they do not have. And that's in the ability of being able to produce drama, cinematic direction, and world building. Now, another question asked was, what's the core of this new VF, right? And to them, it's all about innovation. Virtua Fighter has always been a very innovative series. Virtua Fighter has a lot of firsts, like not even the least of which obviously is first 3D fighting game ever, right? They state why it's part of the reason why it's hard to make a new Virtua Fighter and took a while to get here is because there's a need to innovate, and a new Virtua Fighter has to be innovative just like the previous games. So another thing they're focusing on here is realism. So in the early 90s, when, martial arts movies were very, very popular, all sorts of kung fu movies, a very big part of the appeal of Virtua Fighter compared to, say, Street Fighter 2 or Mortal Kombat is Virtua Fighter was a lot more like those movies. They had a much more like cinematic martial arts experience. So while there'll be things to move the genre forward, it's still going to keep its grounded nature compared to more fantastical elements of other games. Another question asked is, what will the new Virtua Fighter bring to the table to the fighting game genre? And one thing they say straight up is, VF is not a difficult game. And editor's note, very much agreed. I have no idea where the perception of VF is the hardest game of all time came from. At an intermediate and beginner level, I think it's actually just about the easiest series to get into. The hard stuff is hard at the top, sure. That's every fighting game. VF is actually easy, in my opinion. But, so going on, so they think VF is not difficult, and compared to other fighting games, the controls are not complex. The hurdles, though, are the fact that there's no special moves. A new player doesn't know what to focus on first, so we'd like the lower barriers of entry like that. And editor's note again, fair enough. If you play Street Fighter, you see Ryu do a dragon uppercut, you see a fireball, those immediately like, okay, these are the moves I gotta aim for, right? They pop out. VF, you have 80 to 120 moves, and it's a bunch of different kicks. Like, not everything immediately stands out to a beginner of what's the big stuff I need to focus on. So I think that's a good way to look at it. Going forward in the interview, they say things that are perceived as difficult are something we want to focus on as people think, once again, think it's a game with a high hurdle. The weakest point of Virtua Fighter is the characters. They said it, and I guess I can't disagree. There is little explanation of why they fight, especially compared to other fighting games. The main appeal of Virtua Fighter is fighting itself, not the characters. Once again, they say the main appeal is the gameplay, not the actual characters. It's a series that is mainly an arcade game, and that's kind of the reason it ended up that way. But we have to make an effort to focus on the characters and communicate the characters to the players of why you should care about the characters. Story is a main way to do that. Something fun like a story mode is something we're thinking about. Once again, they're not being terribly clear here, but they're basically hinting like, yeah, there'll be a story mode. I think that's a very smart way to go about it. Once again, they're not wrong. Like, characters are not the selling point of VF. The selling point of VF is the gameplay. I love the silly characters. I love Wolf. I love Jeffrey. But, if you just take someone off the street, they're not going to know these people. They're not going to have any attachment to these people, right? And for good reason, because they've never been sold well as characters. Like, to FGC terms, they're functions first, characters second, right? Like, so that needs to change. They need to be characters first. And them focusing on that is very smart, in my opinion. Going forward on the interview, they state, this is a bridge between the past and the future. We need to turn the game into something that people all over the world can enjoy, not just Japan, but also something that'll, keep the classic people returning, the fans. We don't want to betray the fans, but we need to bring in new people. We will build up a community. It's a lot of work to fill in the gap when there hasn't been a new game, in over 10 years. So that's the main bits of the interview, and to me, they're saying a lot of the right things. Focusing on characters, focusing on story. That's traditionally been a lot of the weakest parts of the franchise. The gameplay's always been rock solid. No one's ever complained about the gameplay, right? So the things besides the gameplay are what they need to work on, and it seems like they know that very well. Things like changing up the classic controls is a little scary, maybe. We'll see how that goes, but that's the news that's fit to print. And that's everything, and well, that's the video, my friends. So thank you very much for watching. Hope this video has found you well, and go out and play some Virtua Fighter.